Hello and welcome to this episode of the Ideas Factory. I am Naghma. Joining me on this conversation is Professor Harsh Pant as we look around the important developments around the world. To begin with, President Biden has made his international debut at the G7. We see a renewed tension between the US and China as US presses China on Taiwan, on the origins of the coronavirus, on human rights. And Biden has unveiled a massive plan for vaccination, for donating vaccines, buying and donating vaccines across the world. We see a renewed vigor in multilateralism, and along with that, the pressure between US and China as they come for, as there is a bit of confrontation again. So we will look at all that and hear Professor Harsh Pant's analysis on that. To begin with, Harsh, I would like to start with G7. It's a very significant development at the global level. The G7 gathering, and we remember that during President Trump's tenure, how he had said that these groups are redundant, are of no significance because they are not in touch with the reality of the world today. But now we see a revival, if I may say so, of these groups and of multilateralism. And President Biden is very, very keen that he has to underscore that America is back and the democracies are coming together. So how does it reflect on the future of multilateralism, and what really will be the focus of G7, the world coming together to fight corona, being prepared for a pandemic? Is it redefining the purpose of G7?
Thanks, Naghma. I think, President Biden, of course, this is his launch of his endeavors to shape global diplomacy. He's out there on the world stage for the first time as president, reaching out at a high-level summit and also reaching out to individual nations. So he has a very packed tour still ahead of in a sense that he's meeting critical actors like Russia, Turkey, apart from, of course, the G7 member states who will be who are present in Cornwall this weekend. But I think, the question about multilateralism still hangs in the air. What is the future of multilateralism? How is it going to shape up? Trump was not that wrong when he said that, look, G7 looks a bit outdated, given that it does not reflect the contemporary realities. After all, G7 is a collection of countries of advanced industrial variety. But that has changed, right? We now have countries like China, like India, rising in the economic hierarchy, and they are not represented there. So in a way, Mr. Trump was right that he does not see G7 as representing the focal points of global economics. But therefore he suggested that we should invite other countries as well. During his term last year, it could not happen, but this year again we see what UK has done. UK has invited a group of countries, including India, South Africa, Australia, and South Korea. Now the idea is very simple: that look, these are important countries, but UK has given it a subtle shift. Because UK is talking about a coalition of democracies. UK is talking of the power of democratic forces coming together for global governance. Because I think the fundamental question, and which you had raised in your question, is that we are not sure. I think the world is not sure what the future of multilateralism is going to be. We are living in a world that is perhaps most fractured at any point in time since the end of the Cold War, and the fault lines are becoming sharper. And the West is really pushing to take a stand against a country like China, which the West has quoted for the better part of the last century. So what we are looking at is certainly an attempt to reshape the contours of global multilateralism. How that pans out, we still don't know. But what G7 tells you is that certainly what we call as like-minded countries are coalescing around certain ideas, and that is what G7 today is is talking about on its agenda, from climate change to health, global health, to reforms of global institutions, as well as larger issues of other issues of global governance, including economic resilience that has to be factored in a post-pandemic world. So I think the agenda is very widespread, and G7 hopes that because and they have acknowledged the fact that the world is changing, they are bringing in other stakeholders, and India will be part of many of these outreach summits this weekend. But the challenge, therefore, remains, I think, where it is that how do we take multilateralism forward in a way that does not create more fault lines, but rather tries to solve the most pressing issues of global governance, which at this point look very difficult because major powers are taking very, very difficult and different attitudes towards global governance.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, Trump had also invited other countries other than these group of seven. And UK has also invited some of the countries, India being one. India has been invited as a guest country. But what does it really tell about India's foreign policy? Because we've seen India's active engagement in the Indo-Pacific with the Quad. We have seen India's increasing ties in the West. And now it's being invited as a guest country here at the G7 too. So what does it tell us about the foreign policy posture that India has been adopting?
I think it tells you that India is certainly being looked at as a partner by various countries across the world. Unlike China, which is sort of challenging the fundamentals of the global order, India is seen as a country that has a greater stake in continuing with that order and perhaps rebuilding that order and reshaping that order to the benefit of other nations as well as for itself. And I think there is a comfort level with India today that is quite interesting, and vice versa. I think if you look at the debates in India in the past, where West was seen as a problem, and West was seen as a constituency of countries that had to be tackled. Today, India is much more comfortable. The outreach to G7 or G7's outreach to India adds another layer of India's engagement with the West. We have seen some dramatic shifts, including the India-EU summit, India-UK summit in recent past, which have sort of taken the discussion more substantively forward on some of the most contentious issues like trade and connectivity and geopolitics. So I think what we are looking at today is that the geopolitical prism through which Europe, West in general, and India is looking at the world is becoming fairly similar. And I think that has allowed the two nations to have a conversation on a range of issues which they were not having just till a few years back. So while America was always, a country that India was engaging with on geopolitical issues, Europe was aloof. Europe was not taking any positions, and Europe was deciding to keep, as many Europeans were saying in the past, that they don't do geopolitics. Now, unfortunately, geopolitics has come back to European shores, and European nations are rising up to the challenge in their own ways. So I think India in that context becomes an important partner, and the outreach to G7 in particular, I think is an important indication that this is something that the world looks at India as a responsible stakeholder and would like to have conversations and would like to have India's participation in major issues of global governance. So India is responding to that, to this call for greater responsibility, and West in particular is reaching out. It remains to be seen what operational ideas come out of this, and what kind of a framework develops, which will allow the two entities to work together more substantively. But I think that the trend lines are very clear. Contrary to, say, just a few years back, today the two nations, the two entities, the West and India, are perhaps closer than they have ever been, I would say, in the post-independence history of India. So clearly there is a new momentum in relationship. There is a new opportunity because, we are also at an inflection point in the global order, and both sides recognize the need to work together if they have to preserve their interests, if they have to take forward their values, and if they have to work together to see that a world dominated by one particular country or a group of countries that are inimical to those fundamental value systems does not arise.
Yeah, the world is coming together. Many countries are coming together also against the aggressive rise of China. We've seen that. And as the G7 is underway, we see that the US and China clashed once again after, we remember in March, the in-person clash that took place in Alaska. Now, Secretary of State Blinken has again spoken to the senior Chinese official, and the US is pressing China to take action as far as the origin of the coronavirus is concerned, to cooperate, to be transparent. It's pressing China on human rights, on Taiwan. And we see that Biden has continued the hawkish stance of President Trump in substance, if not really in tone. So, any difference you see here after President Biden came to power than what we were seeing during Trump's time?
Not really. I think, in fact, even the tone is very harsh. Even the tone, if many expected the Biden administration to tone down the rhetoric, I don't see that happening as well. I mean, if you see the statements that have come out from the Secretary of State Blinken to National Security Advisor, to Defense Secretary in the Biden administration, some very, very strong remarks, some very, very strong statements, and some strong demands being made of China. Now, of course, China is also facing pressure across the board. If you look at you look at the world today and you look at Chinese neighbors in the Indo-Pacific, there is a certain pushback against China, and it seems that many in China are recognizing that President Xi Jinping gave a very interesting speech recently saying that we need to tone down the rhetoric, we need to be more lovable. China needs to project a more lovable image. And so there is a sense that the wolf warrior diplomacy has actually been very counterproductive. So I think there is a sense that something certainly has gone wrong, that in a short period of time, we have seen countries pushing back so significantly. And America, contrary to many expectations, the Biden administration is equally forthright, is equally strong on the demands it is making. And I think the most important fault line, which is fairly interesting, is, of course, on a range of issues there are differences. But I think this idea of what happened in Wuhan and the origins of COVID-19 are becoming very, very significant. It is becoming a significant issue in terms of how the world is coalescing around a certain idea. And how the world wants China to push back and to make a case to the to the rest of the world that it needs to be more transparent about it. So I don't know whether China will be more transparent, and I'm sure it won't be given its record. But certainly there is a new dynamic in the way at least certain group of countries are looking at China, and that their relationship therefore seems at the moment to be in a free fall, I would say. Now, there are attempts here and there, you see some trade talks also happening at the same time. But I don't see the kind of momentum that you would expect, at least in the initial phase, where if you go back to previous administrations in America, at least in the initial few months, there was a new, every administration would start with a new sense of optimism about China. Mm-hmm. Barack Obama talked of G2. With China. So, I mean, the world has changed so much in the last 10 years that now you are starting on such a strong wicket, with such a negative trajectory for the US-China relationship in the Biden administration. So I don't think that, that the trajectory is going to evolve suddenly in a very positive direction. The challenge, of course, would be how the two nations relate to each other, and how the other nations who have to relate to these two major powers, how do they figure out a foreign policy response to this crisis brewing between two major global powers?
And this crisis has also been strengthened by more and more proofs coming out about the origin of the coronavirus. The whole debate now, we know that during the Trump administration, when Trump repeatedly called it the Wuhan virus or the Kung Fu virus, like which he liked to call, there was a group of scientists who dismissed it completely and said that the whole lab leak theory was not correct. And the whole focus that time was to pin down Trump on the mismanagement of the virus in the country. But now when we look at it, and as more and more proofs come out, that the virus, that that, the lab leak theory is more substantial than it was considered earlier. The FBI is seriously investigating it, and stronger proofs of the lab leak theory is there now. Along with China, it also shows that this complicity of maybe some organizations in the US and some other countries. So now when we look at it, it looks like the domestic politics also played a role in, in suppressing the theory, which was rubbished last year, which is now gaining momentum. So how do we look at this whole, the debate around the origin of COVID-19 and the politics, the power play that has shaped it?
Yes, this is something I think which is fairly interesting from just if you're observing it from outside, it looks. The debate has gone from one end of the spectrum to another, and suddenly now we are talking of a huge circumstantial evidence in another direction. When Mr. Trump had raised it last year, people often thought that this is primarily a means of deflecting attention, which I think probably it was, given the political context that he was facing. But I think there also seems that at this point, the reality that a lot of the institutions, a lot of the groups who should have been more responsive to that idea, that perhaps there might be a possibility, or open to that idea that there is a possibility of a certain of the leak of this of this virus, probably should have taken that more seriously. Probably that did not happen because there was a group thing going on, that this is all about Mr. Trump and his desire to get re-elected, and so he's deflecting attention. But I think today we know that there were certain individuals, there were certain groups who were complicit in the way this was shaping up, in the way the discourse shaped up, in the way institutions and organizations were used by China, by Chinese sympathizers to take the discussion in a certain direction. And I do think that challenge for China remains, for the world remains today very, very important. How do you get to the bottom of this story? Because this is important for various reasons. This is important not simply to hold China accountable, but this is also important about, how do we tackle a pandemic if you don't know the source? How do you tackle future challenges if you don't know how how they can come up in the future, and what the world community, the health infrastructure, global health infrastructure can and cannot do in the future. So I think this is a larger challenge, not simply a bilateral issue between US and China, but also a larger issue for international community.
Yeah. No, you wanted to add to that?
No, I would just say that we still don't know. Perhaps the evidence is still not there, categorically to say one thing or the other. But what the world can expect after so much death and destruction is that at least some transparency should be there in terms of how a country like China behaves. And if it is not behaving, then I think the world should be pushing back in a way that allows various countries to or the international community to get some solid answers from a country like China. Unfortunately, that is not happening. We are seeing some movement at the G7, but whether that results in a significant outcome, we don't know. What is now happening is that individual countries are using their own intelligence mechanism. Absolutely. So America, for example, in particular, is now looking at its own intelligence system to come to terms with the evidence. But that will always be one-sided in some ways. Yes. So the reality remains that as a global, it's a global community, we have not been able to come to terms with this very, very tragic affair, and we can't, because China continues to fudge issues, China continues to deny access to information, and China refuses, for reasons that are best known to China itself, not to use this opportunity to become really a global leader. If China, imagine a situation if China had done things that the world is now asking China to do, it would have generated a much more favorable response to China. So all the things that Mr. Xi is telling his diplomats or Communist Party, that we need to project a lovable image, the least that he can do is actually reveal information on what really happened in Wuhan, and I think he'll be much loved around the world.
That's what is expected of China, and that's what the US is pressing China to do, to be open, to be transparent, and to cooperate. And though China says that we need to be lovable and China wants to project itself as the world leader, we still do not see that being translated into action, and China is denying all access, though there are increasing proofs of the lab leak theory being true. But we would probably expect that least that can be expected is China should cooperate with this demand of being more transparent and open. So that's all from us on this episode of the Ideas Factory. Thank you, Harsh, and hopefully we'll see you again next week.
Thank you.